wasting any time, I will allow our Honorable Minister, Ms. Andrew Marais, to do the official welcome and also to do some short or brief message of support for today's event. Over to you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Dr. Marley. Something happened to my video, so I'm just going to speak. I'm sorry about this. Good morning, goeiemorgen, molweni noke. While we are to be physically distanced, we are still socially connected, and therefore it is indeed both an absolute pleasure and honor to welcome you to this significant engagement as we commemorate International Mother Language Day, annually celebrated on the 21st of February. Often, we underestimate the importance of affording the space for self-improvement in one's mother tongue, and today we officially acknowledge this by engaging on language issues, particularly this year's theme, safeguarding linguistic diversity and multilingualism. This engagement indeed shows in real terms that together we are committed to empowering all who calls the Western Cape and Greater South Africa and Africa at large home by exploring our national identity while shining the spotlight on self-identity through linguistic practices. Contrary to popular belief that knowledge is power, I instead hold that language is power, because if you cannot communicate your knowledge in a language understood by your company, where does the power then in actual fact lie? As recently experienced in our provincial response to COVID-19 and its subsequent lockdown regulations, the powerful agency of language is an essential necessity because communication is key to understanding, tolerance, and acceptance. It is therefore important for us as stakeholders to facilitate communicative processes and platforms of this nature in which all we serve feels a sense of belonging, regardless of mother tongue or linguistic differences. In this way, we together work towards our vision of a socially inclusive, active, and connected Western Cape. The Western Cape Department of Cultural Affairs and Sport remains committed to ensuring equal treatment of the provincial official languages and in promoting previously marginalized languages, including South African Sign Language. Our department has made significant strides to create an enabling environment in which linguistic democracy can flourish in the province, and look forward to further engaging on how to improve this priority, because once we know better, we do better. We will continue to promote multilingualism, redress linguistic imbalances, and develop previously marginalized languages so to forge a common path together, united in our diversity. I trust the engagement of this significant commemorative day will continue to a better understanding of our diversity and provide greater insight into our multilingual and multicultural melting pot that is South Africa. In closing, we should never underestimate the immense power of language, and in particular, access to one's mother tongue. As the late great Madiba once said, and I quote, "Without language, one cannot talk to people and understand them. One cannot share their hopes and aspirations, grasp their history, appreciate their poetry, or savor their songs," unquote. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for those wise words, and also echoing Madiba's message on the importance of language and also social cohesion. And it also ties very well with the theme for this year, which is safeguarding linguistic diversity and multilingualism, which in other words, it means that I am, you are, and together we are. So thank you for that message. Without taking much time, I will give the presenters, poetry presenters. In the program, we have one presenter for Afrikaans, Iziko, as well as Khoi and Sign language, Onama poetry presentation. So I will be assisted by you, administrator, again on this one. We are waiting for the presenter, the poet, for isiXhosa.
Urasip nama kais ngani na omis. Titake nama nisada. Sida sida gera tsua tsua. Ma da kire tami sida. Sida ho si baba ko abohan. Outsama guru sida. Kau si hau wa tara komai. Amase ti kaus hovatse. Miti betu kaup tu re. Khoi si huvap kau tu re. Til mons ge urasip. Titake kaup kau koan. Kai kobasen. Kui kaip. Kanes ti ka khams. Abohan tawaha. Urasip. Die volk van die namen is de 6e generatie. Geboorte 1. Ek is 'n trotse nama. Ons is gereed om te begin. Gee vir ons die aankoms, laat ons in ons tonge kan praat. Ons het van ons voorvaders af die boodskap ontvang. Ons gaan gesamentlik bou aan. Praat en skryf en ook lees. Inderdaad, dit is die taal van ons wat ons uitmuntend maak. As met ons gepraat word in ons moedertaal, dan sal dit aan ons harte gaan, die woorde. Praat ons moedertong met ons. My naam is Urasip. Ek is die kind van die dapper kinders. Die Kaap van Goeie Hoop, Rebot en Windhoek is die tuiste waar my voorvaders woonagtig is.
Luister, as my lirieke drop, het vier die klank, hier te kort, daar te lang, hier Pinocchio, daar 'n plank, hier is God en daar's 'n staanbeeld. Hier's 'n stops en dan down, hier's 'n job en dan bedank, wat gaan believers nog aanbeveel? Luister, luister en luister dan weer, want kom ons wees eerlik, ons luister nie meer. Wie te prys, wie te kleis, wie se kluisenaar hier, help ons, voor ons onse woorde wil straal, oor 'n podium of voort oor 'n groter geskare, open tog die poorte van ons ore kanaal om te luister. Maak op jou ore broer, die woorde roep, luister. As laat die woordeboek jou ore toe, luister. Want back in the day, ek en jy, ons loop die regte hek verby en enter die segregate. Die skeppers van tyd het dit gebruik om talent te separate. Nou vir die record as ons entertain en die track so lees. Let's take the fans back to basics, verby die rap en bass en maak hulle weer behep met luister. Als het verskillende ritmes verlief, want binne dit skat die pilles van kennis, want hulle moet steeds hoor. Luister net.
Sikoro bekankans. Ti inats ta kai ba ma. Sin urusu ba ma. Sin sira hobada. Saran sin wahuna. O sin onze keizer radan. Sin home atsa rahun. Gaire sida din umsa. It's rasang wana uma.
Moleko twe hantle o tswa kae re tsebe. O sehlo ha ona qenehelo, ha o kgethi nku kapere, o nanara hohle, o submarine ntwa metsing, ha ona qenehelo, ha ona ditlhong o molotsana setsetseng ntwa bosiu. O fufuletsa motho a tlhotle metsing ene le bosiu, a hloke takatso ya dijo re makale, a hohlo le molebe a fellwe ke moya, a thisnono re tuwe o kene. mo o fihlileng teng o etsa sealolo ha ona mo ha o fetela go ye mong o gopo go ba o etsa batho ba kgesehe ha re itlhokomeleng tšhabana sa thesele ha re ba le senonori sena ha re ithuteng ka lefu lena re rue tsebo ha re ruteng ba bang ka lefu lena ke bua ka COVID lefu mahahara.
Kuguzulwa okumkani kumiswe okumkani nguNontsizi Mgqwetho. Yavuka inyatha emazantsi Afrika ekhuzwe ukuhlaba ingekahlabi. Ovuke emini akabonanga nto engayibonanga loo namba isombuluka. Naku ke osenyangweni unegunya ebukumkanini bonke babantu ebunika athanda ukumnika nanko noxa bengayikhona. Wazidala into zonke yena yedwa akabuza nasemntwini xa ezenza. Ukuba phantsi kwethu kwakudalwe nguye wabaphakamisa awabaphakamisayo. Kuguzulwa phezu kwethu okumkani kumiswe kanjalo abanye okumkani. Woda uzibandakanye nawe Afrika uye kwezo mini ulilela zona. Qala ihambo yelanga nenyanga nengxibane eyacelwa nguNtsikana yentshutshiso eyarholwa ngamadolo yeza nobugqi yelange lamampondo. Vuka uzibandakanye Afrika, isinyabi sikhwabusha izandla, amadlagusha alala esothuka wancikeka umkhoba neengcambu zawo. NguThixo ke onokukhunjulwa, into egoso ayinakolulwa. Akukho nto intsha ngaphantsi kwelanga, leyo ikhoyo ibikho kakade. Camagwini.
Dr. Mukapela from the University of the Western Cape Department of Arts, which I believe now it's Humanities and Arts, HOD in the isiXhosa department. May you please give the audience the background of this event. Over to you, Dr. Mukapela.
Enkosi Mama Mali, ndiyathemba ndiyavakala mna kwelo cala. Greetings to everybody. Molweni kuni nonke, Tawedes, and all protocol observed. Mambali gave me, I'm not sure whether this is an easy task, but to tell everybody why are we gathered here today? Why are we celebrating this day? Much as we appreciate this day and we are happy about it, it didn't come easy. It came with a lot of bloodshed of the Bengalis, or people of Bengali, or Bengali speaking people in Bangladesh, who took upon themselves on the 21st of February 1952, that is 69 years ago, you know, to stand up against the linguistic and cultural genocide of the people. Some people can just identify with that, especially in South Africa in 1976, but where there was a bloodshed, people also, you know, protesting against the imposition of Afrikaans on peoples of South Africa from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. This was proclaimed by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which is popularly known as UNESCO. And they took it upon themselves to ensure that all linguistic and cultural communities enjoy equal parity in terms of use and access of information in their languages. The reason for this is to this day, the vision or mission behind celebrating this day is not just to come and showcase how many languages do we have as the people of South Africa, of the continent, and of the world, but also to acknowledge that we are a diverse community in terms of language, in terms of culture, and therefore our identities will also differ, and that creates a lot of complexity. So how do we cohabit? How do we live? How do we embrace each other with these differences that we have as the people? And also to echo the sentiments of UNESCO that languages and multilingualism can advance social inclusion, innovation, peace building, and ensuring that no one, excuse me, is left behind in everything that the world has to offer. And also, the reason also behind this is because, as we said, that the world has a lot to offer, and that is not targeted at a specific group or certain groups, but to all the people of the world. And this comes through learning, you understand? So if others' languages are not being acknowledged, they are not, we are not creating space for them, how are those people going to learn? Because now they have to learn in a foreign language. How are they going to communicate? We spoke about innovation, that they encourage that there should be innovations from different linguistic communities. How are those people going to communicate their innovations, to people that can be able to assist them in seeing to it that those innovations are introduced to the world, are enjoyed by everybody? Because now we talk about also the SDGs, the UNESCO. So how are those people going to access all those benefits if they are if there are existing language barriers in place? So we have to break those as well. We have to build a diverse society towards achieving the social cohesion or inclusion that we spoke about, and also justice as well. How do we build peace as the people of the world if we do not understand each other, if others' languages, or they feel that they are less important than others? So as the people or rather the stakeholders in the Western Cape, in acknowledging this day, we thought that we were going to only focus on celebrating this day. We're celebrating it for the 69th year this year, but have we achieved certain things that are communicated by this day? So we, as the collective, we call ourselves a collective in the Western Cape. The education sector, the communities, the deaf people, the indigenous people of the Western Cape, or also other stakeholders in government, arts and culture, which we're working very close with, and the archives, the Iziko Museum. We felt that we are not doing justice to the linguistic and cultural communities of the Western Cape in particular, if all we're going to do is just to focus on the day, we converge every year on the 21st or towards the 21st of February to say, okay, we are this diverse community, culturally and linguistically, and yet we're not doing anything about it. So we decided last year, we met 2019, then 2020, we felt that we should have a program in place. How do we achieve the social inclusion we're talking about? What are the programs in place? We have to have programs in place. And if you noticed in our programs, I don't want to call them events, in our programs, we always make it a point that we have school children or learners, we have students, university students or tertiary education students. We also have communities, people that are working in the communities. We have your other linguistic groups like your dialectical groups, of Iziko that are forming part of this, because according to the constitution, or rather the language policies, they are not being catered for, and yet those people do exist. They are part and parcel of us. Their languages are also going extinct, as we know that was the case with the Bengalis situation back in 1952, or even before 1952. We don't want to end up with the same situation. What are we going to do? So we had a program last year. Unfortunately, it was interrupted by COVID-19, but we are happy that COVID-19 happened, save all the other, trauma that it came with, but it has exposed us to other new ways of doing things, of reaching out to people. So we felt that we should create space, not that we have to. This space belongs to these other still marginalized groups. We're trying to redress those injustices. We cannot just push them to the past. We have also contributed to that, because other linguistic communities that are also part and parcel of this collective, and some of them will be speaking, they are still marginalized. Do we want to continue with that legacy, or are we going to create space, or rather make it a point that they're being acknowledged? We embrace them, as part of us as well. So as UWC, we've been working. I'm sorry to talk because I have to touch on what we're doing as UWC. We've been in communication with the Khoi group, or Nama group of people, particularly the Khoi speaking people, and also with the University of Namibia that have been teaching Khoi, so that we can start introducing Khoi. And this is part of and parcel of making or ensuring that these languages, they don't go extinct. We revitalize them, we promote them, so that the people also can feel that they are part and parcel of the community of the Western Cape, and hopefully of the country and the continent and the world. So that is what we've been doing as this collective. We are not just converged here to celebrate the achievements of the Bengalis, but also to see what can we contribute as this collective towards ensuring that we don't end up with such a massacre and that of 1996. So this is a collaboration that the collaboration that we are working on. We have not achieved much, but we know that if we are focused, if we all have the same kind of wish, to see to it that we are indeed a united nation in terms of language, in terms of culture, and we embracing, our diversities, not just by speaking in these platforms or in these events, but also in practice in our in our spaces, then we can be able to achieve those things. So that is the background behind the day and the background behind this collective. And we hope to learn from the proceedings that are going to, as people are going to deliver their prepared speeches. And also the main aim also is to come up with a plan after this forum. After this, then what is it that we've picked up from other linguistic groups that presented their situations or environments? Then what are we going to do? We work on that throughout the year, so that when we meet again in 2022, when we celebrate this day, we deliver the achievements. What have we achieved since the 19th of the 20th of February 2021 up until now 2022? What have we achieved? What were the challenges? Then how are we going to forge forward in realizing this multilingualism and embracing our diversities in terms of language and culture? So Galomazuke, with those few words, I will say Kaise Gangas to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mukapela. Thank you for sticking to your 5 minutes as well, plus some few or many seconds. So I'll also request other speakers to stick on their 5 minutes, but thank you for sharing the message and also opening our eyes on where we are, what we are doing as the whole team of the Western Cape in the language fraternity. Thank you so much, Doc. Our next speaker is the Executive Director of the National Library Services, Ms. Nokutula Musa. She is also a co-program executive director. So she will be giving us a message of support, also representing all the stakeholders or partners who are part of this team who made this program to be a success. Over to you, May Musa. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Yabulela Program Director, Dr. Mali, and this, I would like to greet everyone, the Minister of the Western Cape, Minister Mare, and to greet all participants and people who are really attending this important gathering where we are celebrating International Mother Language Day. This is a very, very important celebration. We are celebrating our languages and our diverse cultures. As it has been mentioned, I'm representing all stakeholders. I would like to assure you, participants and previous speaker, we are as stakeholders, we are really doing, we have got programs and activities that are ongoing that we are doing to ensure that we preserve and record our languages. We've got a diverse group of stakeholders that we work with in doing that and ensuring that our languages are preserved. We are working in putting, especially in putting this event together to celebrate this day. We have been working closely with the Swahili Language Board of Southern Africa. And this is a growing community. It's quite important that in what we do, especially as libraries, because I'm from the space of libraries, we start to really make meaningful efforts to try and collect and have this information in this language available in South Africa, because this community is growing. I would also like to acknowledge PenSal, who are also promoting multilingualism, especially the 11 South African languages, and to protect the language rights of South Africa. Iziko Museum for providing a platform for this event and the work that they do in preserving our languages. The Department of Cultural Affairs and Sports, we've got ongoing programs as a government to ensure that we've got activities that are promoting and preserving our languages. The Indigenous Language Action Forum, the University of the Western Cape, SupuSupu Khoi language project. This is also important because these languages have been previously disadvantaged. So we still have a lot of work to do, and we are very pleased to be working with this organization to ensure that we preserve the Khoisan language as well. The Afrikaanse Taalraad is also one of our key stakeholders that we are working with in preserving languages. And then as the National, I would like to also take this opportunity just to briefly outline what the National Library of South Africa is doing in terms of languages. You know, it is quite important to make sure that the language, first of all, is recorded, because if it's recorded, it will die. As the National Library of South Africa, we are working, we've got a unit that is responsible for make sure that we are promoting publishing. We are creating opportunities for the language to be recorded, for different diverse languages in South Africa to be recorded. We've got a publishing grant, which is funded by the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, the National Department, through the conditional grant of community libraries. We have reprinted 93 classics in different South African languages, which are available in public libraries. We also have got ongoing programs where we are actively promoting the writing and reading. So we are doing Funda Mzansi reading competition, which is a writing and reading competition, where we are also promoting the writing, the recording of our languages. And a number of outreach programs to promote the culture of reading. And in closing, I would like to quote a proverb, an African proverb, which says, "Until the lions learn to write, the story will glorify the hunter." So let us write our tales in our rich languages and play our part in preserving our indigenous languages. And on that note, I just also want to take advantage and remind everyone, let's sanitize, let's stay safe, let's do all we can, and let's vaccinate. And ngiyabonga, ngiyaleboha, bayadanki. Thank you. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you, thank you. Oh, no, is it thank you? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Musa, for that presentation, and also well representing all the partners in this endeavor. For our next speaker, I thought that there will be someone who will just have that oomph to do a poem in any of the languages, because we are Africans and we're celebrating Mother Tongue or Mother Language Day. So if there's anyone who will just open your mic and you blow your energy with a poem, because the technology has failed us on what we've pre-recorded. So that one I will allow. So without further ado, I will request our next speaker, Ms. Benedita Muthane, who is the former CRL Commissioner, who is the PEN South African Language Board member, who is the SABC Board member, who is the Robben Island Museum Board member. But let me stop there with the list, because the lady is very, very busy. She's living what we believe in giving in terms of social responsibility and nation building. So she will be addressing us on the topic, which is titled "The Role of Linguistic Diversity and Multilingualism in Nation Building and Social Cohesion." Over to you, Ms. Benny.
Thank you, Dr. Mali Namfundo, and it really is a privilege to be here, and Iziko being my favorite place in the world, one of my very favorite places in the world, and I'm very honored to be sharing space with all of you, from Minister to CEO of, and all the other illustrious guests and my learned colleagues as well. I have a few critical questions that I ask, and I'm going to stick to 5 minutes if possible. And the first question is to just again touch on what is International Mother Tongue Day, or IMTD as we say. But my learned colleague Sebolelo Mokapela has already spoken about it earlier, which is fantastic. So I'm just going to repeat quickly about the IMTD, or International Mother Tongue Day, being adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2007 to promote the preservation and protection of all languages used by peoples of the world. So it's an official UN day, like Human Rights Day or World AIDS Day, and it promotes awareness of linguistic and cultural diversity and multilingualism. And as Sebolelo spoke about its history, its origins in a 1952 conflict in particular, in what was newly independent Pakistan soon after its separation from post-colonial India, with Bangla or Bengali speaking students protesting their language rights in the city Dhaka, and police shooting and killing many students, which resulted eventually in the independence of the country Bangladesh from Pakistan. This history of violence about language rights resonates with South Africa's own anti-oppression struggles, including those from 1976, when students were slaughtered for their protests against Afrikaans as official language of instruction in township schools. So IMTD celebrates the right of every person and community to speak, to protect and promote, and to be educated in their mother tongue or mother language. What then is this mother tongue or mother language? It's really only the language learned since childhood, indeed the language learned in the womb. It's usually the first language, unless the child, of course, is displaced into a different language group, which is an entirely topic for another day. So this mother tongue or mother language is the language of the mother, literally, and is the language of the womb, which we learn while we are still in the womb growing. In relation to constitutional language rights, South Africa consists, as we all know, of a diversity of cultural, religious, and language communities, whereas in the past, colonial and apartheid policies bequeathed a legacy of division and inequality between these communities. But through our constitution, we seek to promote and protect linguistic communities, among others, to heal divisions of the past between communities, to foster constitutional values, and contribute towards social cohesion, or Ubuntu. I am because I care. I am because I belong. My humanity is inextricably connected with your humanity, with the humanity of all within South Africa, of all within the world. As we know, South Africa has 9 provinces with 11 official languages, from Afrikaans to isiZulu. Special mention is made in the beginning of the Constitution of Khoi, Nama, and San indigenous languages, of sign language, as well as religious languages like Arabic, Hebrew, Sanskrit, and languages commonly used by communities in South Africa, from German and Portuguese to Hindi and Urdu. It truly is an all-encompassing constitution covering as much as is humanly possible in the 1990s when it was written. Parliament, as we all know, has been working for several years, and I was delighted to assist this at some time, on amending the constitution to include South African Sign Language, or SASL, as our 12th official language in the constitution. This is very exciting and precedent setting. Why then is it important to teach children in their mother language? The essence of being human is communication, whether conscious, as in we in this webinar today, consciously, or unconscious, as in what I was dreaming about 3 hours ago. Don't be naughty now, Jabbar. Whether it is verbal or written or sign language. International studies have shown that the unborn fetus communicates with the mother in the womb, hearing her bodily functions like her heart beating and responding to what she listens to, whether it be music or television, etc., and even the languages she speaks. It's said that learners thrive when taught in their mother language. Educationists also recommend that first language teaching be done for the first 5 to 7 years of schooling, which are the most formative years. The transition to high school and later university may even some trauma for learners or students at times to change from their mother tongue to lingua franca, English, although in Namibia it hasn't done much damage, them having adopted the lingua franca of English. Educationists also recommend that in the last 2 years of elementary education, it's optimal to use bilingualism to aid the transition to a new lingua franca. Why then do we promote the preservation of mother language in South Africa in particular? As we know, Africa has some 2,000 languages, of a world total of up to 7,000 languages. That is, the continent of Africa has over 1/3 of the languages spoken in the entire world. That's a lot, 1/3 of all the languages in the world, including some of the oldest languages and word roots or phonemes in the world. The oldest word roots or phonemes or clicks located with the San in the Kalahari, of course. Approximately every 2 weeks, learned colleagues say a language dies when the last speaker of that language usually dies. This is a tragedy, many argue, because the language, a people's language, is its lifeblood. It is the people. In South Africa, under colonialism and slavery, indigenous peoples were violently forced to suppress their own languages and to speak only languages of the colonizer, a practice extended into apartheid, with the forceful imposition of Afrikaans on the majority of the country's peoples. We're not even going into the real origins of Afrikaans in the indigenous and slave cultures and languages, all the way to today's Afrikaans on the windy Cape Flats. Ek sal nie meer vandag kan sê in my 5 minute nie, maar julle weet wat dit is in terms of the actual history of Afrikaans. We just want to recognize our brutal history, including the suppression of a myriad of indigenous languages, and the fact that our founding constitution officially recognizes 11 local languages and mentions the Khoi, Nama, and San languages in particular. This helps us work towards continuing the to heal the divisions of the past, because healing is not a finite process, but continues for lifetimes. Like our country's San motto, bear with me as I try to pronounce this. I hope that's not too bad. A meaning unity in diversity, or diverse people unite. It is a perpetual project in progress. Our long walks to justice continue. Thank you for hearing me. As an aside, before I stop, Dr. Mali, as you know, I am a poet as well. So if you need a poem, just drop me a message via WhatsApp or whatever, and I'll be happy to give you a poem.
Thank you so much, Ms. Benedetta. Maybe you can mesmerize us with a poem before I go to the next speaker.
No, I'll have to go find the poem. So continue with the program and just indicate when you want the poem.
Okay, after the speaker, then you can also, you can join in. Thank you so much for offering. That was a mouthful. That was a mouthful. It really reminds us of where we're coming from, and also reminds us that even though I speak isiXhosa and my neighbor is speaking Afrikaans, but we're still one people, South Africans. That's something that we always need to remind ourselves, that instead of segregating ourselves because we speak or our tongues are beating different cliques, but that doesn't mean that we're not South Africans. And that's what we need to echo every day so that we can be united. Thank you so much for that presentation. Amongst our partners, we also have the Swahili Language Board. And we have Prof. Aldin Mutembe, who will be giving us a presentation just to share a message of support and also celebrating one of our African languages, Swahili. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much for organizing this event. And I thought I should share the experience here in Tanzania. I've titled my brief speech as the intralingual characteristic of Swahili language, the African symbol of unity. Today, Kiswahili has about 250 million speakers. I've done a research and I presented this last year at the UNESCO meeting in Paris, where we were also celebrating Mother Language Day. Stretching from the shores of Indian Ocean in East Africa to Central Africa and to Southern Africa, this Bantu language is developing and spreading. One of Kiswahili's unique characteristics is its interlingual nature. It is adaptive to other languages, and yet it retains its qualities and distinctiveness. So as we celebrate the International Mother Language Day, and as we focus on our theme, safeguarding the linguistic diversity and multilingualism, let us contemplate the potentiality of Kiswahili as an African language in fostering liberation, unity, social cohesion, and peace. Let us move beyond this social achievement and see how we can use African languages in promoting trade among ourselves and building strong economies. So I don't know whether I'll get time to touch on this very important notion on using the African languages in Africa to build strong economies, so that we also see the utility of the languages. The similarity of Swahili and other African languages could start by, I want to start by showing that the South African nation anthem, Nkosi Sikelele Africa, translated as Mungu Ibariki Africa, stands as one of the testimony of the Africa's sisterhood or brotherhood, if you so wish. Kiswahili is spoken in the following countries or parts of these countries in Africa: in Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, Somali, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, Comoro, and Madagascar. In the northern part of Madagascar, you have 2 dialects of Swahili, and in Comoro, you have 89% of the Comorians speaking a dialect of Swahili. There are also scattered speakers of Swahili in South Africa, in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, and Namibia. It is a popular language in colleges and universities where African studies are taught. It has drawn attention to media, including international radio and TV, blogs from Asia to Europe to North and South America. It is indeed popular in social media. So Kiswahili was accepted as official language of African Union 17 years ago, as you all are aware. And it is the only African language in the SADC bloc. You know, people tend to say it is the 4th language, but I would like us to look from another perspective, saying it is the only African language in the SADC bloc. The question then is, what makes Swahili a language to identify with? What gives it this global status? I turn now to briefly examine the language in a broader African context. Kiswahili is intralingual language. The Bantu movement from Central Africa eastwards towards the Indian Ocean and later southward to the Southern Africa saw the gradual development of a language later to be named as Kiswahili. Most linguists start with the history of Kiswahili on what I call the second trek. That start does not give the needed attention to the contribution of Africans in the development of this unique language. That history, like most colonial histories, take aboard the contribution made by Arabs and later Europeans, or if you may change it, the role of Islam and Christianity in the development of this language. Events that are considered include slave trade, business, the spread of the Islam and later Christianity, colonial education and administrative steps, etc. But they ignore or they don't give the due weight to the fact that Africans themselves spread this language, and that's why it is unique actually, because from the areas and societies and ethnic languages that Swahili was moving from West Africa, Central Africa to East Africa and back now to the interior of Africa, Swahili was picking some of the words. So you find it in Swahili, a lot of words, several words actually from Hausa, from Igbo, from the Cameroon Bantu, you name it, in the Congo and so on and so forth. Today in Tanzania, Kiswahili has risen to the position of being a national language. The growing world status of Swahili neither competes for or nor precludes the importance or international possibility of any other African language that I want to emphasize, because of the experience that we have here in Tanzania. In Tanzania, we have more than 153 languages, according to the Language of Tanzania Project 2012. Kiswahili serves as a unifying force. So several ethnic communities speak their mother tongues or mother languages, but also all of them recognize and give Kiswahili its due. Kiswahili's interlingual characteristic gives it a chance to include concepts, imagery, phrases from other languages in and outside Tanzania. Oh. In other words, out of our language diversity, we have language unity. It is so real to the extent that there is a cross-pollination between languages, or code switching and code mixing happen on both parts without jeopardizing the status of the other. I, for instance, am a Haya from the northwestern part of Tanzania in Kagera region, bordering Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. I speak Haya language when need be with my ethnic members. We tell each other, we do this and that in our language. We have written books, we have Bibles, we have dictionaries, and so on.
Mask yam.
Sorry?
No, proceed, Prof. It was just an interruption with one of our guests. Apologies for that.
Okay, so I like others. Yeah, so you have Sukuma people, you have Chaga people, you have name them. But all of us, although we have our mother languages, but yet we recognize Swahili. Here I am, Swahili professor, actually doing all that is needed, is at my disposal to promote Swahili. But again, out of this diversity, we have a language a unity that keeps us all aboard. So the example of Tanzania now, the example of East Africans, is a good example of this language that builds peace and tranquility in this region. And some of you may recall that we also call Swahili the language of liberation, because our brothers and sisters who were in Tanzania had to learn Swahili and use it in the army and actually count like moja, mbili, tatu, moja, that is 1, 2, 3, 1 in the army. And the other day we were looking at the possibility of starting teaching African languages using African languages, and stop teaching African languages using Western languages. For instance, there is no need for a Shona or a Xhosa to learn Swahili using English. So we have started actually a project of teaching Swahili using isiZulu. In so doing, you also promote isiZulu on one hand, but you also promote Swahili as a language of unity, of teaching Swati using Swahili, of teaching Shona or Sindebele, you name them, in Namibia or Kwanyama or Oshivambo using Swahili, so that the Oshivambo people will also see the meaning of this language, at the same time giving credit to their own languages. So what I'm talking about is, we have to see, yes, we have diversity, but yes, we need unity. And Swahili has done this in Tanzania, where we still have our languages, but we all are united using one language. That is briefly what I wanted to share, and we can, from here we can discuss what we want to promote. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you so much for sharing the context in Tanzania. Prof. Mutembe is coming from the University of Dar es Salaam, so he is also celebrating with us. I've received a message that someone is ready with a poem. Can I give you 2 seconds? Then we'll jump quickly to our next speaker.
I thought it's appropriate because we're celebrating unity and diversity, diverse people, diverse communities and languages unite. And it's called Fragile. It's from my book called Ova, the poetry of my name. So Fragile, in your eyes that shift with the anxieties of these times, I see the deepest compassion imaginable for the perpetrators in all we are, the survivor victims we're forced to be. In your wide open gaze, I see reflected my very own soul. And for your single act of kindness, I offer you my fragile heart. I hope it's okay, Nomfundo. My pleasure for contributing the poem.
It's beautiful. I hope you'll also share the title of the book so that we can also access other poems as well. Thank you, Ms. Mutheng. Someone has just sent me a message that she or he needs 10 seconds. Or is it Xhosa?
Corona, hamba COVID-19. Nivakele ilizwe lingumponga Mpolisiti. wafuna umntu bethuna e-Wuhan esinye sezixeko kwelaseChina, wafuna umntu ebulawa ngumkhuhlane, wakhala umzali wathi umntwana mrhulumente eChina, nceda president phuthuma umntwana. Zange ubana ngeentloko iinkokheli zoMzantsi Afrika, sathatha isigqibo ngentsebenzisano yamasebe baphuthulwa. Wathi okaMkhize kwezempilo ndikhona ndonceda, wathi okaNqakula kwezomkhosi wokhuselo ndikhona ndohlangula, wathi okaMtswaledi kwezekhaya ndikhona konke kolungiswa, wathi okaMbalula kwezothutho ndikhona ndoxhasa. Wabeka umhla wokunduluka kweqela lomkhosi, umkhosi wokhuseleko kazwelonke woMzantsi Afrika, ngomhla wokunduluka kweli qela esikhululweni seenqwelomoya zehlabathi OR Tambo. Wawabeka amabini amathathu okaRamaphosa, eliphambili lisithi kubo, ninikezele ngobenu benu kunceda isizwe, yazi iinyembezi kwabahambayo, iinyembezi kwabasalayo. Kum kwathi qatha esenqana uMendi, wathi umntu hayisuka isifo sesamazwe esi, sisifo sababhabha ngebhaloni esi. Wabuza omnye, balandelwani bezosugilisa? Wathi omnye, balahlelwani bengabantwana bethu? Suka ubuthongo balithamsanqa kokaMkhize, imibuzo yamxinimxinile waxinana. Abemi bampheka bemophula, babuze uqule ngantoni xa umkhuhlane unokuhlaseleli. Wathembisa satsho segogololo. Kwelinye icala abemi beli banxunguphala, bagxalathela nezivenkileni ukuthenga, bathenga bathenga. Okumangalisa amaphepha kuzindaba, ingawona wona ahambayo. Oku kwakhwankqisa kwadidisa, kanti lo mkhuhlane unento nendle. Wafika umhla wokubuya kwabathunywa eChina, bebuya nodumo emazweni, kwayimincili nemihlali kwiintsapho. Unomji nodano bengazubonana de kuphela iintsuku zedinga, 11 elivisayo leentsuku. Kaloku urhemu sazikhusekile, uphuma impuhlo emva kwezi ntsuku, batsho konke kwenzeka ngempumelelo. Ngethamsanqa kubo kungekho namosulelekileyo, nangona kunjalo umthetho wangqinwa, kwathiwa indawo bayilungiselelwe eLimpopo, apho bogcinwa khona iintsuku eziqingqiweyo. Hotele ithile eLimpopo kubo yalikhaya de bagqiba iintsuku zedinga. Banxakama abahlali ndoyika hleze kuqhambuka udushe lobuhlaba ngexesha likaxakeka. Kaloku uyabuza umntu, kungani benza kwelethu iphondo, kungani bengayi kwaba amaphondo? Waphendula umntu wathi, wamsukubhanqa wena uMzantsi Afrika ngomntu wokuhlala kuwo. Enkosi.
Yani, you've revived so many memories. Thank you so much, Miss Lunika, for that poem. It gives us really the history of COVID-19 and its impact. Unfortunately, we don't even have an interpreter to other languages, but the poem was about the impact of the COVID-19 and also the unity of South Africans and the unity of the political fraternity, with the great work by our president and the Minister of Health. Thank you so much for that prayer, Sister Melissa. Without further ado, let me request Mr. Muhammad, Jabba Muhammad. I can't see you on the screen, so I'm not sure whether you have connection problems or your interpreter will just proceed, but you are next in the program.
I am here.
Okay, no, thank you so much. So the Provincial Director of DEFSA in the Western Cape, Mr. Jabba Mohammed, will give the presentation. Thank you so much. Over to you, sir.
Hello, everybody. I'm really honored to be a part of this for the celebration of International Mother Language. And I'm acknowledging the Western Cape as well, that this is an annual celebration. Listening to everyone's presentations, I am in awe of that, because the core identity of somebody is their language. And that being promoted is important. And myself as a representative of the deaf community and also of the community in the Western Cape. For many, many, many years, deaf people have faced many barriers. Deaf people have been crying because there's no accessibility, because there isn't access to university, there isn't access in hospitals, there's no access in institutions, police stations, there's always miscommunications. And
We've been helping numerous deaf people from deaf society as well as organizations and our affiliates as well as the deaf schools, and we work with the deaf schools and our affiliates as well. So today I'd like to share a bit about South African Sign Language. What is South African Sign Language? Many think that it is linked to a spoken language, that it's got an English Sign Language, Afrikaanse Sign Language, Xhosa Sign Language, Venda, etc., Swahili, whatever, or Zulu, that it has its own categories linked to spoken languages, and that is not the case. It's a big no. Within South Africa, it is South African Sign Language with different dialects. For example, your accent or the province where you grew up in your background. Maybe your accent differs to somebody else's accent, but they are saying the same thing. So with sign language and there's different dialects, it's sort of similar. It has its own structure. There's 5 core aspects. The first one is hand shape. Second, location. Third is movement. Fourth is palm orientation, and then facial expressions. So when I sign, I have to use all 5 of these aspects. Looking at my hand now, my hand is facing to my face, and that's wrong. Your hand should always be facing to the front. So with South African Sign Language, there is its own structure, its own grammar, its own grammar. It's not linked to a written language. And the proper word for us is not necessarily grammar, but terminology, South African Sign Language terminology. It is from our deaf communities, and it needs to be accepted. And any dialect or any terminology needs to be given by the deaf community. We have a lot of deaf people that are skilled in this field of the language, but they're not being utilized because they don't have the degree or the paper to say they're qualified. And so it's quite sad because they are extremely, they have the extreme knowledge and they're experts in the field, but they're not being used because they don't have a piece of paper to say that they can be used. And that's a big challenge for us and very sad for us in the deaf community. And then secondly, with South African Sign Language interpreters, also another big challenge. We have many coders, which are child of deaf adults. So it means that their parents are deaf, or their mother or father is deaf. And the child is hearing, and the child grows up with their mother tongue being sign language, because their parents signed to them as they grow up. And later on, a coder will then decide to become a South African Sign Language interpreter, and they become trained professionally. But today we're not using these people because the requirements, because of policies, because of procedures, department policies, etc. And it's quite sad because you get people that are skilled and that can do it, but because of this old system and there being no change, even looking at the 2 interpreters today, Michelle and Beryl, 2 of the very good interpreters, both are coders. Both their parents are deaf, but their skills are not being utilized. And so it's sad that you need to have a paper. Yes, it's important to be qualified and to have a paper, but as deaf leaders, we should have the right to choose which interpreters we can utilize, and people need to take note of that. It's important. With all language departments need to take note of that. Language is important. Mother tongue is important. Whether it's sign language, it comes from the deaf person. It's their core, it's in their blood. And also not only sign language, South African Sign Language interpreters, but deaf interpreters as well. There are new deaf interpreters that are entering into the field. Many people think, oh, but how can someone become a deaf interpreter? And to explain that, with a South African Sign Language interpreter, a deaf interpreter observes and takes in what the sign language interpreter is interpreting, and they then translate it or interpret it into their specific dialect, or their specific or simplified version. For example, if there is really complicated jargon being used in any presentations, the deaf interpreter will then interpret that and break it down or explain it in South African Sign Language dialect. For example, the COVID regulations, some of the jargon used was very confusing and complicated, and the deaf interpreters then there to explain it to the deaf community so that they understand that. For example, the word curfew. Everybody knows what a curfew means and that it was from 11 to 4, etc. But for us as deaf interpreters, we will then sign, you have to stay at home from 11 to 4. And from 4 o'clock onwards, you can be outside. So we need to give explanations, not that the deaf are stupid, but the fact that sign language is their first language and it needs to be catered to them as such. There's a lot of things that I can explain and go into depth, which I cannot do because I've only got 5 minutes. But I'm really happy that I've been a part of this and I'm honored to have been given a chance to give a presentation. And I hope that everyone participating today with all your languages and specialties, that going forward, if we do this again, there's no technical issues and everybody knows they need to switch the camera on to suit deaf culture. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Japa, and also the lessons that you always share with us. Sometimes we make mistakes, but what I appreciate with you is that you'll quickly send a WhatsApp that please correct that this is how we do it. In that way, we are learning on the way. And thank you for your willingness to share the information and to teach our communities or on issues pertaining to South African Sign Language and the deaf community. We know that as PENSAC, we have the South African Sign Language Charter, and you were very much assisting on it to become alive and to be implemented. But we still rely on your competencies to make sure that we always align ourselves to what is practical and acceptable. It's a Saturday for English, I guess, for implementing the charter. Thank you so much. Without further ado, let me request Mr. Martinez Fredericks, who is representing the Western Cape Provincial Language Committee, to have a brief and a very short message for the day. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Over to you.
Yeah, now I've got just a few things that I want to talk about. First and foremost, goeiemorgen, good morning, cheers, colleagues, friends, distinguished guests. First, allow me to pay my respect to those colleagues who passed on during these difficult days as a result of COVID-related illness, to those who lost a loved one, a family member, a mother, father, brother, sister, child. My sincere condolences. My message to you this morning is a message of hope. Hope that even in this pandemic also will pass, and that the wound of losing a loved one will also heal. Let me use the opportunity and reflect on the status of the marginalized languages, not just in the Western Cape, but across South Africa. My fellow colleagues, this event marks a year since we had our collaborative mother tongue workshop at the Iziko Museum. I was hoping that somewhere in today's presentation we'll get some feedback on the progress made with the resolutions. Of interest to me was the long list of challenges identified as related to policy decisions made in the Western Cape and perhaps also elsewhere in the country. I personally felt the pain when people related their stories of not being able to communicate and be served in the language of their choice in simple daily life, like going to a hospital, going to a clinic, going to the doctor, going to the police, going to the courts, and be helped in the language that they speak. As an example, as a result of the employment equity, we find that many areas, Xhosa-speaking persons who sometimes does not even know the Afrikaans are appointed to serve in Afrikaans communities. So the question is, where did we go wrong? The Western Cape was since time immemorial occupied and the only home of speakers of Indigenous Khoi and sign languages, of which Namagovap is probably the last remaining of those languages. We have almost lost all the other dialects, with only here and there a Tora or a Griqua language speaker. We know that the Western Cape in their language policy adopted Afrikaans, English, and Xhosa as their official languages for the province. The question is, what about the other marginalized languages like Nama and Bushman languages? Do we say that they are not important? We owe the recognition of the Nama and Bushman languages to the descendants of the first indigenous people of this country, the Khoi and San. It cannot be business as usual. It must be business as unusual. We have to find the political will to acknowledge the Nama and Bushman languages as official language. We have to find the right champions to implement that. We have to put the necessary resources behind the implementation plan. And we have to ensure that from 2022, these languages are in our school curriculum, that we have the necessary teachers that can teach the language, and that we support those language activists who unselfishly use their own personal finance and resources to keep the marginalized languages alive. I thank you for listening. Khoi Gangans, Gangan Aboche.
Khoi Gangans, Mr. Fredericks, thank you. I believe that Mr. Denver Dorocha will also share the same sentiments and also perhaps even add more tone and also be specific on his presentation about Khoi. So I will give him the platform to do his presentation. Mr. Torocha, Denver, may you please take the platform.
Torocha, my name is Torocha. Today on International Mother Tongue Day, I'm always reminded of the violence on my tongue, the fact that today a child of a Khoi woman from Graaff-Reinet is only able to speak and understand myself and my people in the tongues of the people who came to this land to rob and rape and murder us. How am I able to ever find healing in the tongues of those who hurt us, who continue to hurt us? 400 years ago, this land was filled with the most beautiful click sounds. Khoi, Khoi, and Mu were the languages that were spoken on this land by an extremely wealthy people. Today, our tongues don't even remember those words anymore. Even though there are still words that are left behind on our tongues have forgotten the words that belong to us. And it is so problematic that we have a country that fails to recognize that there was a genocide, a language murder on this land, that 400 years ago there were people who came to this land deliberately and intentionally wanting to destroy the tongues of First Nation communities. And what happens when we lose our languages? We lose ourselves, we lose our identity, we lose our intelligence. We are easier enslaved because what remains when all we know is the chains on our tongues, which is the words of our colonizers? What remains? And it is very sad today that in a country like South Africa that talks about post-democratic rule and alleged freedom, that there's a complete erasure. One of my favorite words in Khoi is kakapusa. Kakapusa means erasure, amnesia of this genocide that happened on this land. We think it is okay that majority of our Khoi people only speak Afrikaans, this Dutch dialect that was really created by our Khoi people to trade with these Dutch, these VOC ships, only later to be forced to only speak this tongue because these colonizers could never understand our language. Today we also find ourselves institutions, academic institutions like the universities. There is a complete erasure, that there is something missing with the African languages departments. When those African languages departments don't even recognize that there are these missing First Nation languages these missing First Nation languages that should be there, formative tongues of this land that are not there. It's Corona time and we can't erase that there have been our elders who have passed on. What happens when we are left with no elders? Our kaikwen, what happens if they can no longer teach us these words? What happened if the memories that they wanted to share with us is deprived from us because we have a system that does not realize that, or not realize, because I think the system does not recognize that when you speak to a genocide, you need to speak to reparations. You need to speak to money that needs to be invested in these projects. We can't just have institutions lump first languages that was tortured and tormented by colonizers, that left our tongues in the most violent fashion, that they are now just supposed to be part of all the other language landscape. That is impossible. That is a further genocide and a further colonization of this work. And we can't have that. Going forward, it is about these conversations of genocide needs to happen. There needs to be a reparative conversation also happening. Last year we had a Khoi language gathering in Steenkop. Steenkop is most importantly as a place within our country where the first Khoi woman translated the Bible into German. Yes, as problematic as it is to translate as German and the Bible, because the Bible is partly also responsible for our Khoi people not having our language. And yet that process happened with a few people who supported the work. Where was the institutions and where are these, the country as a whole? Why in 2021 do we still not have dedicated funds to support this restorative work? We can't just apply to the National Arts Council like anybody else, because our struggle, the genocide that happens, is now erased and now we're just all part of this this pool. So for now, for me, Mother Tongue Day is always a point of tragedy. It's a point of sadness. It's a point of pain. Because what's worse than being in pain is not having our pain being given the words of our ancestors to help us in those healing.
Kunjani xa sibe simlinda ngomnye umbongo wesiXhosa, Chair?
Okay, just a very short poem that will back 2 seconds, then we proceed.
Okay. So lo ngumbongo ongobomi esaziyo sonke into ukuba buhlala bunamahlande enyuka. Ubomi. 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 Lenti bubomi inzima, inzulu yaye iyasinda. Into aphezele ngamahlande enyuka abuhlungu. Into aphezele ziincasa zobusi kwakuyo apho. Kwanobukraka obugqitha obekhala bukwakho kwakuyo apho. Into aphezele ziinzingo nezilingo. Into aphengena ngqekelelo echanekileyo. Ngentsasa uncumela ukuphuma kwelanga. Emini ujamelene nemingeni neentshaba. Konke oko ingumzamo wokuzalisekisa ukulunga, obulungisa kwanenkqubela phambili. Ngokuhlwa nako untywizisa uqhelekile, inhliziyo ilihlwili, iziganeko zikuphahle ngokulandelelana. Ko, kaloku bomi imizamo yamandla kwanengqondo yokugcina impilo. Ewe kaloku kubo into zimana ukuqhawuka zihlangana, kodwa nceda ungancami mntakwethu. Nceda ungancami mntwana omgquba. Kaloku xa unokuyibeka inqawe kuya kuvakalisa ithonga kubuye kuthi cwaka kulibaleke. Iya kuba liqaqobana nje elingephi eliyakumana ukuba nawe ezingcingeni kuninzi kuya kuthi cwaka kuthi nkcwe ingcinga ngawe. Umbuzo ngokuba ingaba buya kuphela ubomi akuyibeka inqawe umntu kusini na? Ingaba buya kuqhubekeka noxa umntu sele ekobandayo na ubomi? Lo ikwangumbuzo ngabakwele mimoya nakwabaphilayo eluntwini. konke oku kungobomi, ubomi, oh ubomi, hayi ubomi, ubomi, hayi ubomi. Kinyamathe ke uthobe isingqala kuba konke kuyintando kasombawo. Wena nceda nje ungancami. Nyamezela ekunyamezeleni, nceda ungancami. Amaqhwa neenkqwithela zingakuqangqula, kodwa nawe qhula uqine uligangathe, nale iza kugqitha. Kona ukukhula akuzanga kwabalula, kona ukuphila akuzanga kwabalula. Nkqu nookhokho bakho bangangqina. Milisela iingqiqo zakho emaphupheni wakho, ungazivumeli iimeko zikuthibaze wethe amandla. Xa usenyunyweni biza uqamata, xa usenyunyweni biza yena umdali, yena wokuhlangula akwange ufudumale, kuba wena njengomafungwashe kuye, uthando lwakhe kuwe lolungayiwayo. Qina nje womelele, nceda ungancami, nceda ungancami, nceda ungancami. Siyabulela nje.
Yeah, thank you so much. Enkosi kakhulu Tata. Can I please dedicate this poem to the late Dr. Jadezweni, who was laid to his resting place yesterday. This is beautiful. And in a way, you're saying that accept what comes true, whether it's sad or bad, but that's life. Thank you so much. I guess that when we get these beautiful poems, it also tells us that we should revive those platforms of poets and we should support them, not only by providing the platform, but also financially, also considering the COVID-19 impact. Siyabulela kakhulu Tata Uqakathe, and I hope that we'll get your contact details. Thank you. So let me allow Dr. Zakira Dokrat to do her closing remarks. I know that she is in the university, Rhodes University, but I've also heard some rumors that she's going to join us in the Cape, and we can't wait for that. Linguistic, her area of research is one of the areas that is very attractive and also very informative. It addresses what is really happening within the justice system. So over to you, Dr. Dokrat.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Molweni, Goeiemorgen. Good morning, colleagues. It's great to be here and hear the interesting discussions, especially from Mr. Jabbar Mohammed regarding the sign language presentation as well. Because I've only been afforded 5 minutes, I'd like to start off with a quote that I think really sums up where we're at the moment and our discussions here this morning. So if you'll indulge me, I'll read it. It's by the late Neville Alexander, who said, "Language is a little bit like air. You only become aware of the importance of air when there is no air or when the air is dirty." It's the same type of thing with language. People take language so for granted, and as they're happy and things are convenient, they're empowered. They can't be bothered at all. It's only the strategic visionary insight of a few people who realize that what you can do with language and that a lot can be done from the point of view of power. Now, I think that quote in itself is so powerful, but it raises subsequent points that I just want to touch on. For instance, we take language for granted every day in our own spaces where the use of English and other languages suit our agenda, to the exclusion of many people around us which we're unaware of on a continuous basis. Becoming aware of the importance of language for the majority of us, and I'm sure all of us tuned in here today, are aware that we are at an advantage being able to understand English and not being solely reliant on an interpreter. So for instance, I know that I become very aware of being excluded from language when I travel abroad and attend a conference. And for a simple thing like catching a taxi, getting directions, and I cannot understand what the other person is saying. I'm quickly made aware of the fact of how millions of our fellow South Africans experience this on a daily basis. So, do we all agree, and I think we should, that there's an abuse of power, obviously from those who are in power, on how to use language and how we promote the use of our Indigenous languages in the country? There's often an agenda that is pushed in favor of an elite, and I'm always quite critical of how that agenda is pushed in excluding the Indigenous languages. Dr. Marley mentioned that my area of research is forensic linguistics, so I primarily work with the courts and our languages in courts. And every day on a daily basis, we experience the majority of our people entering the justice system, being excluded on language. And it's not to say that you just can't understand proceedings. It goes to the very heart of who you are as an individual, how excluded you feel, how humiliated you must feel, and how you are not able to contribute to a conversation that affects your life. It's really about raising awareness, and I've heard today from the various presenters of the projects that are being undertaken and the milestones that have been achieved and the strides that continue to be taken on a daily basis. I think it's about really portraying this message every day. Yes, it's International Mother Tongue Day and it's Mother Tongue Language Month and so forth. But this can't be a once-off event. It can't be a once-off day. We need to make sure that our languages are portrayed every day in a positive manner, and that as African language speakers, we continue to promote the use of our languages and the importance of using our mother tongues in high status domains. There's often a misunderstanding that by advancing the use of the Indigenous languages or our mother tongues to include the Khoi and sign languages in the discussion, that we are trying to replace English or undermine the status of English. And I think that's an important point that we need to continue engaging with and ensure that people understand, especially English monolingual speakers, that we are merely trying to place the Indigenous languages and Khoi and San and the Nama languages alongside English equally on an equal basis. So what happens then is we are often caught in a battle with English and a battle amongst ourselves as Indigenous language speakers as to whose language is more prestigious and carries more status in the country. We see this unfolding as well in high status domains, even for example with the SABC, and we know that some of the Indigenous language news programs are under threat of being cancelled. So as the Indigenous Languages Action Forum, ILAF, we are continually engaging in these spaces with the relevant authorities, engaging with all of you and participating in these events. We have recently started a web series that was begun last year, where we have webinars by experts and we invite relevant people to join and the broader public. The recommendations and the conclusions that are reached at these webinars are then shared with the relevant people. And I think this is a very important point that we must take into account. Today we're having such important discussions, and I hope that this recording is not only posted on the Iziko and the ILAF and the PanSALB websites, but is also sent to relevant partners so they are aware of what is actually happening in our spaces, that we are not just contributing these discussions amongst ourselves and it stays internally. People and the broader public must be aware of what we are doing and why it's important to use your mother tongue, not only in your home, but to encourage your child to learn it at school, to encourage your child to use it at university and learn it there and intellectualize it there. To go into a space in public and be proud of the fact that you speak another language and be able to use that language, and not aspire to another language where you think that language has more power or is of greater significance. So I think today it reminds me not only of the importance of using our Indigenous languages, but also for those of us, and myself included, who are second language speakers of the Indigenous language. It's such a great feeling to be able to communicate with somebody in another language. And I think as us, as second language speakers as well, we too have a responsibility of encouraging fellow second language speakers to use the indigenous languages in our country to ensure that our mother tongue fellow citizens are able to communicate with us and do not feel excluded. So the message really from ILAF is a message of inclusion. It's a message of unity. It's one where we'd really like to see the indigenous languages, including the Khoi, Nama, and San languages, being used on an equal basis amongst all of us. And I urge all of you today, please, when the seminar is over and our event has taken place, don't resort back to using English tomorrow. Please use your mother tongue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dokrat. And we can't wait for all the webinars that will be developed or that will be aired out by ILAF with all the partners as well. I just want to make a short acknowledgement of not the speakers, but also our guests who also have in attendance board members from PENSAL. I've noted that we also have Mr. Guy Redman from Arts and Culture, also board members from ILAF, and speakers who shared the podium with the Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture yesterday. Amongst them is Prof. Kashula, is also amongst us, and all other people who are very important in terms of their contribution in language development. And thank you so much for making time on a Saturday to be in this platform. I've noted that Mr. Denver has managed to connect. So let me allow him so that he can, now that he is available, he can just share his message quickly before we go for the vote of thanks. Denver, may you please?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm here, Dr. Mali. So,
okay, yes.
Okay, Gangans to everybody who's part of this event. I think it has been made mentioned by Dr. Macapella that, you know, it should really be an ongoing event. My discussion topic was really about the genocide of first languages in South Africa and why it is still unacknowledged and what needs to be done. I think we've had this conversations now for a couple of years, and I think we are still at the point where we have points of clarity that needs to be clarified. I mean, when people talk about Khoi and Nama, and then you just hear about San, Khoi is the language, the Nama is a dialect, so the Nama is not a separate language, it's a dialect of the Khoi language. We also have when we talk about San language, you should also know that that is deeply problematic. You can't just put people who are now put into the San, which is a deeply problematic and racialized, colonized term that you just lump people in. We don't just say now Xhosa, Zulu, and Setswana, and Siswati, and we just say Bantu languages. We have names for each of those languages. And I think we need to move away from this colonial thing of wanting to make things easy by just lumping people into different language categories because it makes our work easier. It's not about making our work easier. It's also then about recognizing how when we erase those individual names, that we continue the genocide, that we act no better than the colonizers. When we think about, again, when we talk about language, we have to talk about the fact that in my video, I said that I, as a child of a Khoi woman of Graaff-Reinet, today only speaks the tongue of my colonizers. I speak the tongue of the people who came to this land to rob, rape, murder, imprison, and enslave my people. Today, I have to find my thoughts. I have to make sense of this world in a tongue that's not mine. That is a genocide on multiple levels. That is a genocide that I can't even explain because I don't have the words to speak to the pain that was caused by these people. And today that pain is ongoing. We keep on talking about internationally, there is this conversation that language loss finds people who were victims of that brutality, that they are more likely to be violent, to commit suicide, to find themselves drug and alcohol abusive spaces. Today, our Khoi people forced into this colored label are more likely to be alcoholics and drug users. We have a Khoi woman is more likely to be murdered by a Khoi man. Why? Because our tongues have been violated. We speak a language of the people who brought violence to our communities. Today, we can't erase that. Languages like Afrikaans have a responsibility, even though our Khoi people created this Afrikaans to trade our land and our cattle with these Dutch colonizers. We were later forced to speak this language, abandoning who we were, because we had to work. We were forced to work on these farms of these Dutch colonizers. Again, we can't erase that there was these laws, the Hottentots Code, that justified Dutch farmers to take Khoi people and turn us into slaves on our own land. And today we have this conversation. It's not happening. The other day, and you must stop me, again, in Canada, they talk about the stolen generation. Why is that not being spoken about in South Africa? I was driving past the St. Mary's Roman Catholic school, and for me, okay, that is in Woodstock. There's a similar school in Paul. Today, we are completely determined to erase how those churches, how those schools forced English and Afrikaans onto the tongues of our Khoi people, because that was the only way that they can force us into Christianity, a religion that is not ours. Why are all those instruments, all those structures, all those systems that were part and parcel of a colonial system that was brought to this land in 1652, how are they able to just escape accountability? And so when we talk to genocide, we have to speak to all of those institutions and instruments that were part of the genocide. Why is this conversation happening in Canada? Why is it happening in the US, in New Zealand? Why is it happening in Australia? But in South Africa, we are all just completely told to not talk about this because nobody wants to take accountability. Nobody wants to talk to millions of people who today call this Dutch dialect, which is really not, can Afrikaans call the Dutch dialect? Probably not. So, and then I'm also almost done. A couple of weeks ago, a Khoi elder in Paul passed away. She was 89. She passed away of corona. For me, it is a serious situation when we know now that some of our last speakers of the Khoi dialect of South Africa will probably also pass away in the Northern Cape. They will not be able to share the remnants of the language that they still speak. Why? Because a system in South Africa, institutions in South Africa have decided that these first languages, Oma Katrina, she's now the last speaker of Mu. Oma is how old? In her 80s. She will not survive maybe to see 100. But institutions have decided that first languages, that first people are not worthy of the same humanity. We are not seen as victims of gross human rights abuses because that colonial mindset that still doesn't see us as humans still exists. And I think that is where we need to start. And I think I'm going to end here. Before I end, I just also want to say, Dr. Makapela, I am very excited for what's going to happen at UWC. UWC has the space. It has the decolonial mindset, I believe, where a language like Khoi that can do so much for the many Khoi people at UWC, the students and staff. And for me, that to hear you again speak to that, it really excites me. I'm done.
Denver, and thank you so much for making it true. We were really worried that we couldn't access you. We wanted to hear from the horse's mouth. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the message of continuing to preach unity within the language speakers, and also ensuring that the indigenous languages and languages which have not made yet the official status, we push for them to be official at the end. and for you not to deter when you see that other doors are closed, but to continue the spirit. Thank you very much, Denver, for that. Without further ado, may I request the CEO of the Iziko Museums of South Africa, Ms. Roxana Omar, to do the vote of thanks in closing. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for participating in the International Language Day event and contributing to the theme safeguarding linguistic diversity and multilingualism. Dr. Mali, thank you for being the program director and for managing such a difficult situation that we have been facing today and our technological challenges. So I really appreciate the manner in which you've actually handled the technological challenges we faced. And I'd also like to thank all the poets who very willingly contributed their work impromptually. So this is been hugely, you've really made this a very rich event. Our speakers, Minister Anru Murray, Western Cape Minister Cultural Affairs and Sport, Ms. Noktula Musa from the National Library of South Africa, Executive Director, Corp Programs, Dr. Sebolela Mokopela, University of Western Cape, Ms. Bernadette Muthian, former Commissioner of the South Africa's Constitutional Commission for Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Rights, and a former board member of the Iziko Museums of South Africa, Professor Alden Mutumba, University of Dar es Salaam, Institute of Kiswahili Studies, Mr. Jabbar Mohammed, Deaf South Africa, Mr. Martinez Fredericks, Western Cape Provincial Language Committee member, Denver Doroha, language activist and poet, and Dr. Zakira Dokrat, the Indigenous Language Forum, Dr. Mali from PanSalp, Western Cape, Senior Provincial Manager. Now, one cannot go without saying thank you to our partners who made it all possible on this day, they being the University of Western Cape, PanSalp Language Board, SupuSupu, Khoi Language Project, Western Cape Department of Cultural Affairs and Sport, the South African Sign Language, the Afrikaanse Taalraad, Swahili Language Board of Southern Africa, National Library of South Africa's Center for the Book, Indigenous Language Action Forum, and the Western Cape Language Committee. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Iziko team for also contributing and for making these platforms available. So without further ado, thank you, and I'd like to call this event to a close.
Thank you, Dr. Mali.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.